Hey, so this is going to be another Whatifalthist reaction video. This is his most recent video called How Death Creates Everything. And as you can see, I'm in my Joker costume again because this one definitely warrants the nihilism Joker, because this, obviously, talking about death, he talks a lot about nihilism in this. And whenever I talk about nihilism in Nietzsche, I address as the Joker. So let's get into it. I found this to be a very interesting video, and it's one that is kind of well timed in my life. Whatifalthist does make relatively well made videos. It's just that sometimes he throws so much of his opinion into it that it just kind of ruins a lot of it and kind of really has a tendency to, I don't know, he just goes way too far with his opinion sometimes. And this was a prime example, because in this video, okay, I mean, there were probably 70 to 80% of what he said I disagreed with. And before I get into the disagreements, I'm going to start with the agreements. There was one big thing I agreed with him on in this video, and that was the idea that death can bring you closer to life. And I think that can be applied to a lot of different scenarios in life. Whenever life really begins to get bad in certain areas, it can also make you appreciate the good in life. I've had a pretty wild ride over the last, year and a half since I moved here to Columbus. And while I haven't been really close to death, I mean, it has been a lot of days where I've had to worry about the collapse of the basic, you know, pillars of my life, of my career, going through three jobs in only a year and a half, and like three big jobs, not just like pizza delivery. These are ones within my field and everything, monetary problems. There's been some stress for me, and it's makes me appreciate, the more stable and kind of sometimes a little bit boring times in life. Um, Luckily, my life is somewhat back on track now. I just started a new job a week ago, but just mentioning that, not wanting to get hung up on anything like on that, not trying to babble on about my life or anything here. But anyways, I agree with him there. I believe in the Napoleon Bonaparte quote: to die is nothing, but to live defeated and inglorious is to die daily. And as usual, I do have my Napoleon, painting up there. It's not really fully in view, but, I take that quote to mean a lot of different things. And I take it mostly to just mean that it's better to try to thrive in life than just survive. I mean, we all have to survive, but thriving should always come first, and or it should be a part of it. Maybe not come first. We should always try to keep, being happy and do the best that we have at, the things we do in life, as much of a part as just staying alive. I think too many people do just worry about staying alive, and maybe having just a little more than their neighbor has is the number one thing in life. But I really do believe that, a life lived poorly is much sadder than a life, not lived at all. And then, moving on to now my disagreements with Whatifalthist, because that was really the only one. Most of what he put in this video I disagree with pretty profoundly. He talks about how belief in an afterlife is necessary, like the Christian belief in heaven and hell. And I very profoundly disagree with that. I'm not going to get onto it too deeply, but, as someone who grew up believing in hell and, believing that I could still go to hell despite my Christian beliefs, because I recognized going to a non-denominational Christian school, all the conflicting doctrines between the different denominations of Christianity and different teachers, as well as the other religions, the hundreds of other religions that have been on this planet, that it just was an absolute statistical improbability, as well as just absolute madness trying to add it all up. And I realized you could go to hell in a lot of different ways. And equally dangerous, the idea of believing the perfect nirvana is waiting for you based off of your religious identity is dangerous, and it's stupid. It can depreciate life in this world. There was I believe it was T.S. Eliot. I'm not totally sure. It was some missionary who said, he is no fool who sacrifices what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose, which was a reference saying that heaven, eternal heaven, outweighs this world because this world is temporary, which would be right if there was a heaven. But if there isn't, that's a really stupid, dangerous, and bad quote, because it's showing how it does depreciate life in this world, believing in heaven and hell. But that's not the real point of this video. I just wanted to really throw that in because that made me a little mad when I hear that. I get so angry when I hear some people talk about how the belief in the afterlife is such a nice, wonderful thing. Look, if you want to believe in the afterlife, that's fine. And, maybe I like to sometimes hope there is a nice afterlife waiting for us, but don't teach it as an absolute certainty. That's where it gets dangerous, and that's where it gets really quite frightening. Okay? Okay, now moving on to the main point of the video, because this is, of course, now why I'm in my Joker costume, because he did talk extensively about nihilism in this video. He lists 4 pillars of how we try to avoid death and how to combat death, as written in the Jordan Peterson book. And the 4 pillars he lists in this are nihilism, fanaticism, hedonism, and heroism. Sorry, it took me a moment to remember those. But, for one, before I even get into anything on this, obviously that's a huge oversimplification on the part of both Jordan Peterson and Whatifalthist. That's all 4 of those are very broad and open-ended. But for the sake of keeping this simple, I'm just going to, stick to those 4 parameters and make my response about those. And the ones I'm going to differ with him the most on, he talks about how, it's inevitable we have to reach one of these conclusions. Well, I don't think it is. I think we all come up with a whole mix of different reasons why we survive in life, And he makes it out like the only one of those 3 that is acceptable is heroism, and that you have to find some great purpose for your life, and you have to, it has to be a holy, righteous, religious cause in which you preach your ideas to the world and save the world. Well, I don't agree with that. I do this because it brings me some fulfillment, just like he does with his YouTube channel, but I recognize the extremely limited impact that I have in the world, as well as of my own ideas. Idealism and good intentions can't solve the world's problems. Only action, thinking, and experience can, as well as, coupled with maybe some intelligence and idealism. So I think it's dangerous the way he kind of separates these 4 into these big, broad categories. And of course, now the biggest one I'm going to spend some time talking about in this is nihilism. Of course, for those of you that don't know, that's why I dress as the Joker in some of my videos in which I discuss nihilism, is because the Joker is a nihilist and an absurdist. But I am not a nihilist in the same sense that the Joker is. I am in more the sense that Nietzsche was, and that I am an active nihilist, and that I do believe that life is inherently meaningless and all morals are inherently baseless, other than basically what we give them in this world, other than what society gives them and what we find for them in our own lives. We can't count on them to, be this holy, righteous, eternal thing that, there's always going to be some perfect karma or God or any entity that is going to give us perfect punishments and perfect rewards for our actions. We essentially are the ones responsible for our actions. Now, then there's passive nihilism, as represented by the Joker, which is just the belief that it's just the same belief, basically, that life is inherently meaningless. And then the conclusion the Joker reaches after that is, okay, well, therefore it doesn't matter if I just go out and kill everybody. And that is, unfortunately, what probably some people do reach, as they study nihilism. And it's one reason why I think even Nietzsche said that his teachings weren't for everybody and that not everybody can maybe even handle that. And I kind of even somewhat understand and agree with it myself, but I'm, as somebody who really puts Nietzsche up on a high pedestal, I think that mostly we just need to focus on the key thing that Nietzsche taught there, which is that, we need to look to both our own lives and those around us to create meaning in life, rather than to a god or to karma or some other supernatural entity. That's kind of where I go with it. And I strongly disagree with Whatifalthist in his opinion that I think he somewhat is parroting from Jordan Peterson, that, you can't believe that life is meaningless and be a nihilist and yet still not find meaning in it. I very strongly disagree that, just because you maybe to some extent accept some amount of nihilism in this world doesn't mean that you can't, still try to find it in your own life, or society at whole can't try to find it. But that was one big area of disagreement I had with him. I think he did not talk about that one adequately. And I don't think, that he talks also a lot about how Western societies are all falling into nihilism, and we're all, falling apart, and I don't totally agree with that either. I mean, at the end of the day, the whole world's got problems, including the Western world. But look at the problems of the Western world and of Japan compared to certain other countries like India or Africa or South America. I mean, no offense if you're Indian or African and you're watching this, but those regions have plenty of problems of their own too. There's a reason why people are immigrating from those countries to the United States and to Japan and to Europe, and it's because on the whole, the problems of the Western world are significantly lesser than those of certain other areas of the developing world. So I don't agree that everything is just infinitely worse here. But, enough about that. I mean, then moving on to one of his other categories I strongly disagree with. I'll save heroism for last because that was the one that was kind of the weirdest. He had kind of the weirdest definition of that I'm going to spend a while talking about. But hedonism, hedonism is, of course, just seeking pleasure above all else. And I agree that that can be a negative thing. You can't just seek pure pleasure in this world. You have to balance it with other things. If all you look for in life is just to enjoy your meals, enjoy your drink, have a big house, have a, have a job that you like, even if the job is an absolute, nothing, a job that you take zero pride in what you do every day. It's just something that you can get through the day with. I mean, I think that is a bad way to live life because eventually pain will find its way to you, I think, and trying to avoid pain at all costs is a waste of life. But at the same time, I think, not to sound like I'm just, immediately pivoting the other way, but I mean, it's also natural to somewhat avoid pain and somewhat seek pleasure in life because at the end of the day, life isn't this big, grand, epic journey in which you slay the Jabberwocky and good and evil, fight off with each other like in Star Wars or the Batman versus the Joker. Life really is sometimes we're just animals. We're just highly evolved apes. And that's really to some extent what we just seek in this world is sometimes the simple pleasures of life. Sometimes the greatest thing in the world is when you're just exhausted is just to have a good night's sleep. Sometimes when you're starving, just having a good meal can be one of the most, reinvigorating things. And a little bit of drink and a little bit of, narcotics, a little bit of, all these things can be the thing that sometimes really can be the spice of life. So I do disagree with him, that, all forms of hedonism are bad. I think there's nothing wrong with seeking some pleasure in life. But, and even in like your job role, for 4 years, I was in a relatively easy job role. My first role with JP Morgan, and it definitely had a lot less pain in it than other roles I've had. And to be honest with you, I was happier there than I've been in other roles, which sometimes makes me wonder if I did make the right call leaving it. But it was also, to be honest, a nothing job. It was just an absolutely rock bottom entry level role where I barely made anything. Half my coworkers were people I didn't really like, and I knew that in the long run, doing it would not make me happy, but I also knew that leaving it was going to be stressful. I knew I'd have to encounter more high risk, high stress jobs, more probability of a job not working out. I never thought I'd go through 3 jobs in only a year and a half since I left it, which is what's happened for me since I moved from Indianapolis to Columbus. But at the same time, overall, I would say it's a necessity because life has pain in it either way. And it's not all just pleasure and just trying to avoid pain. So I kind of agree and disagree with him here. But I think, I think he goes a little too far in trying to say that all hedonism is bad. And then the last area, which is kind of the weirdest area of disagreement. Oh, but before I get to the last area of heroism, I want to say the one area I do agree with him on this triangle, fanaticism. I totally agree that trying to just single-mindedly dedicate yourself to one ideology or a political party or a religious cause or even an irreligious cause can be a dangerous thing. You have to kind of remember that, just seeking all of your identity in a group and in, pushing some ideology is not going to fulfill your life. It's going to probably leave you disappointed. And at the end of the day, we're all just individuals, regardless of what ideas that we choose to put forward or not put forward. That doesn't mean, ideas don't matter or politics don't matter, but you should be very careful about seeking your, meaning in life through the identity of just whatever group you belong to, because I probably is the least likely area to fulfill you in life. And I agree with Whatifalthist and Jordan Peterson there. However, then the last area, heroism. Now, this is one where it's kind of weird because I mostly disagree with him, but I also don't entirely. I mean, I agree that we all have to some extent, like, I guess you could say, try to be the heroes in our own life. But at the same time, it's weird because, I mean, just because you pick a cause and just because you try to be the good guy in your own story doesn't mean you necessarily are. You know, a lot of people in this world have thought they were the heroes in history. It's hard to believe, but Hitler thought he was the hero in history. He really thought Nazism was bringing about Aryan supremacy in this world and saving the world from, the evil Jewish and Bolshevik menace. Joseph Stalin thought his communist, utopia would be remembered down the line, as a very tough but necessary regime. I think he said once all the brush of history is removed, people will see, the necessity of what I did. Well, no, they didn't. They realized he was actually a brutal, communist dictator with a lot of problems. Same with Mao Zedong, same with Mussolini, same with a lot of, people who believed what they were doing would be justified in the long run. So I'm very skeptical of the idea that we all have to think of some cause to make ourselves a hero. I think sometimes just trying to discern the best we can, in life and try to just, I guess, do it in the way that we ends the best for us and those around us is the best way we can do it. Even if we believe wholeheartedly in the ideas that we're putting forward and the causes in our own life. I mean, and I guess the best way to just talk about this is by relating a little to my own life, what I do right and wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody always thinks their coworkers are the jerks and not them, and we all think that we're smarter than our coworkers. We all think that, oh man, it's such an injustice that I lost this job and all. But then there's there are times when people do need to be removed from their roles. And there's some times where we are the ones that's a problem in our office. And that includes me, and also there's the times where our ideas on life are wrong, but first, going back to the coworker and work situation, like for instance, like I said, I went through 3 jobs in 1 year here, and I mean, I wouldn't say the other people were evil or that anything went that horribly wrong. But the first job that I moved here for, the senior associates just did not want to train a greenhorn like me that was very new to that kind of work, and basically, they weren't evil, but they were just kind of jerks. And then plus it just was a bad situation after a while because they were lazy and they were losing control of the department and they weren't particularly smart. And it was a terrible place for somebody who was just starting in their first year to be. So for me, it wasn't very good. And it was kind of a mutual thing by the end of the first year that I decided to leave. So, I mean, I wasn't like, I think there's a danger in seeing yourself as the hero, like, oh, everybody was evil and just taking a shit on me. Well, that wasn't quite what was going on. But in that sense, I probably was, for lack of a better word, I guess, the good guy. But then take the job that I had right after that where I got disqualified by missing 1 point on a licensing exam called the SIE, which was one of the necessities you had to take. I mean, that was 100% my mistake. And, not only did I pay for it by being put out on unpaid leave the next day, my boss had to pay for it too, because then he had to start over only 60 days after he hired me, finding a new person. And neither of us were happy about it. So I guess I wouldn't say I was the villain here. I mean, I paid for it, but it's just one of those things in life that, it just happens. That's what a lot of things are. There's no pure good guy or pure hero and villain, it's just, things are more just different shades of gray, And then relating that on kind of a broader scale to my atheist views that, I've taken up as opposed to my religious background, and some of my other non-traditional views, it sometimes is easy to get trapped into the mindset of seeing myself as the hero fighting against, the religious people, many of whom have ideas that I know are both irrational and immoral. But at the end of the day, I try to always remember that they're people and so am I. They're fallible. I'm fallible. They're not evil and I'm not righteous and holy fighting against them. It's just, for some reason on this one particular thing, I'm a little bit ahead of the curve. And, I have to try to convince others, to see what I've kind of come to see as I've gotten older and broadened my perspective and exposed myself to more sources of information and hope that more reasonable-minded people will do it. But where I'm going with this is it's not a battle of good versus evil. But it's very hard to not remember that some days because so many religious people are so horribly, horribly ignorant and aggressive and just, they almost make it feel some days to me like it is good versus evil, And I know that's not correct. But so that's what I where I disagree with Whatifalthist and Jordan Peterson on this is that I think there's a lot of danger in seeing yourself as the hero fighting against, the villains and monsters in the world. Because sometimes, as Nietzsche would say, in fighting monsters, you can become one yourself, or lest you must be careful that you don't become one yourself. And I very strongly do believe in that. It's something I try to keep in mind with me every day to remember that, while I want to try to be the hero in my own story and try to live the best life I can, you know, there's a good chance you can sometimes become the villain without even realizing it in your own story. So I try to remember that all the time. And that's partially why I even somewhat, you could say, I have a little bit of a hedonistic side to me, because to some extent I recognize no matter what you do in life, you know, it may all just not work out anyway. So you could just go and get hit by a bus tomorrow. You could end up being wrong about the ideas you put forward. I mean, I've already been, in order to become an atheist, I had to be proven wrong about virtually every idea I had in life first. And so sometimes you might as well just enjoy your bloody life. You might as well just try to derive something from it that you like. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to get a big standing ovation from most people when you die. Or if you do, it doesn't even necessarily mean that you were a good guy, just because everybody tells you lived a good life. Joseph Stalin had one of the biggest funerals in all of human history, and he was not a good person. So, where I'm just going with this is, I disagree pretty strongly with a lot of what Whatifalthist has said here. I think some points he made were good. As usual, it was a very interesting video, and I understand the struggle for meaning and the struggle for survival in life. I have not had the hardest or the worst life in the world, but I have many times in life, you could say, been somewhat broken down a little bit. I've had to realize that my views on life were wrong, that my views on my own life and the world were wrong, and had to try to regroup and had to try to, rethink what I was doing. And, so that's what I would say is my kind of closing note to Whatifalthist here, and to those listening is, as somebody that doesn't have all the answers to life, but tries to, find meaning in my life like everyone else, is just, you have to kind of find it for yourself. And other than that, just as the Joker would say, life is a joke and death is the punchline. Just try to do it in a way that you find somewhat funny and fulfilling, and just do the best you can, because that's probably all it's going to be at the end. So I hope that was entertaining. Hopefully that was informative, and as usual, if you disagree, feel free to say so in the comments section below. But just thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.